this is a EIT trace from incremental peeps 0, 4, 8, 12. And you can see that when you go from 0 to, and it's in patients, from 0 to 4, it's a fairly square thing because you are filling the most upper part of the lung where the counter pressure from the abdomen is very little. When you go to 8, it takes a longer time. And when you go to 12, it keeps on for a substantial time. Actually, if you do an increase, let's say from, as we did earlier, from 6 to 16, you can see an increase in lung volume building up for up to an hour. And during that hour, what is happening is a slow pushing away, breath by breath, of the abdominal container. And so the abdomen is giving way when the diaphragm is pushed by the lung in caudal direction. The belly is just, the abdominal wall is just moving around, letting this volume be adapted to. So, and it's not a huge volume because it's only about half of the increase in lung volume that is directed towards the diaphragm. The rest is increasing the chest wall diameter. So it's a very good thing to do, put up the PEEP to an acceptable level at an early stage, waiting for an hour to see the result, instead of making, the shortcut is of course to make a heavy recruitment maneuver with a full inflation with a very high volume. That will of course also move the abdomen away, but it will recoil. So it's not better, it's just causing more side effects on circulation. This is really good, is to do it slowly because you have very little circulatory problems when you do it like this, and you have the same results of gas exchange and you have a better effect on compliance because giving this time makes everything smooth and fine, and the lung is opened up from top downwards and the tidal volume is moving further down. But of course, PEEP inflation is also an inflation, so if you lower PEEP, you deflate the lung again. So you have to maintain the lung volume. Here you can see, this is from Anders Larsson, who's now working in Uppsala. They increased from 0 to 12 in PEEP, and during 60 minutes they had this increase in compliance. Tidal compliance kept on increasing. This is a result of the slow increase in lung volume. And this is a study by Christian Putensen, who is in Bonn, and they increased PEEP, and then they looked at the first minute and at PEEP at the first minute, and then afterwards up to 6 hours. But already after 1 hour they had pushed away the belly enough and there was no further increase. But up to an hour you can expect that you have an effect on the lung volume by the PEEP increase. And of course here is one of our studies where we increased from 0 to 16 for 10 minutes. And you can see that there is a continuous increase in lung volume, and the red is an online arterial oxygen tension measurement, and you can see that it's also going up. But also look at what is happening when you momentaneously decrease PEEP to 10. What a rebound. So you can understand what is happening with oxygenation if you disconnect and suction, because that is even worse. The English word is vacuum cleaning, and this is really vacuum cleaning. It's not a good idea. So, this is EIT prior to recruitment, 10 minutes after recruitment, and 4 hours afterwards with the same PEEP. So it's a good idea to put your PEEP in correct position early and wait for a good result. Don't do too much very forceful, hasty recruitment maneuvers. The law of Laplace applies to a balloon, referring to what Nader said before. A balloon is not a very good example of a lung, but a balloon is a fairly good example of a single alveolus without surfactant. And this is one of the problems in ARDS and respiratory failure is decrease of surfactant. So in this case, as Laplace law says that the pressure needed to keep it open is inversely proportional to the radius of the alveolus, means that when the alveolus is getting smaller, you need more pressure to keep it, prevent it from collapsing totally. And that means also that if it is totally collapsed, you can imagine it's an infinite pressure needed, but usually 30 up to 80 centimeters of water. And this is of course not something that is totally neutral for the tissue to be given such pressures. So in a normal lung with surfactant, it is possible, due to the surfactant, we can have different radius of nearby alveoli without them collapsing, because the surfactant improves the stability of the lung. But when you have lack of surfactant, then of course the law of Laplace begins to work, and the small alveoli will empty into the big one. That means in a patient on supine, the lower alveoli will empty into the upper one, and it will be difficult to keep the lower ones open. The compliance, as I said before, is proportional to the lung volume. This is a study where they, on pigs, where they inflated gas in the abdomen to increase the abdominal pressure to see what happened. And you can see here the upper tracing is the airway. This is the esophageal pressure, and at start, before the pressure was increased, the total compliance was 28, the lung compliance was 50, and the chest wall compliance was 63. And then they inflate the gas in the abdomen, and they increase the pressure substantially. And what is happening is that total compliance goes down from 28 to 10. So they had a real high pressure in the abdomen. But what is interesting is that, well, of course, the chest wall compliance went down a lot because of the high pressure in the abdomen. But what is interesting is that also the lung compliance decreased. But they did nothing to the lung. They did nothing to the lung, so why did lung compliance change by more than 50%? Because the high pressure in the abdomen lowered the lung volume. It forced gas out of the lung. So now we have a lung which is in a cage that has diminished because of the diaphragm has moved upwards and pulling down the ventral part of the rib cage. So when the lung volume decreases, also compliance decreases. So this is an example that if you here started to increase PEEP, you would re-inflate the lung. And compliance would once again increase. So even without any harm to the lung compliance decreases when you increase the weight and the pressure in the abdomen. So in the extrapulmonary patient, you have the total, in this case they have written it as elastance, is the compliance is high in the lung, and but it's fairly half of the compliance is in the lung and half of the compliance is in the chest wall. But when you have a pulmonary case, the balloon with fluid in, then almost all the compliance is in the chest wall. The chest wall has no impact because it's so weak in comparison to how stiff the lung is. So in these cases, now we are talking about the non-responders to PEEP. You have a small lung, the outer volume of the lung is almost normal because it is a small gas volume but a huge fluid volume, up to 2 liters of fluid and tissue, and then half a liter of gas. And of course, if you increase, you can do any violent recruitment maneuvers like Amato and Borges up to 60, 80, but you cannot in a short time force that fluid out of the lung. The only thing you can do is inflate the upper lung more than it was. And then, as Nader said before, 6 milliliters per kilo of patient. But the lung is not a size of a normal patient anymore. It's like you inflate in a very small patient. And now it's so you calculate, let's say the patient is 80 kilos, so 6 milliliters, that is 480 milliliters of tidal volume, but now the lung is equal to the lung of a young girl or boy of 12 years. And of course, 480 milliliters is a hefty tidal volume. So this is really very important to realize that you do not ventilate to predicted volume, because the lung is not necessarily the size of that. It is smaller. So when you do PEEP steps, you can see that instead of this nice curve going up, increasing compliance, you get a curve, here it's increasing, but if you had gone further up, it would have decreased again, and you would have a very high pressure working on the lung tissue. And this is from a Gattinone paper back almost 20 years back, but it's very, very informative. To the left you have the extrapulmonary PV curves at 0, 5, 10, 15. And here you have the pulmonary 0, 5, 10, 15. And you see there is very little increase in volume by PEEP. It's almost like a single curve going up. So the higher the PEEP, the higher the end inspiratory plateau pressure, and the higher the risk. It's actually, in this case, they were up at 35 centimeters with 15 in PEEP. And in this case, they were at 28. And the transpulmonary pressure here was much lower. Let's see. Here you have the lung compliance at 5 in PEEP was 70, and here it was 40. But total compliance in this were almost the same when they started. The patients were both, when on the ventilator, without knowing anything about the lung separately, both had a compliance of 40 milliliters per centimeter of water. But underneath, when you looked at the lung separately, this was 70 and this was 40. So this turned out to be a dangerous patient to put PEEP up. And here's what other describe as recruiter and non-recruiter, and you can see how similar they are. So a patient that is extrapulmonary is a responder because you can push away the abdomen and make room for the lung to expand. But in the pulmonary, you cannot get rid of the fluid in the lung. And then, of course, if you do like your experiment there, with, I think you said 58 liters in 48 hours, was it? 58 liters, that's a lot. A lot of peeing to be done. You should always remember that when it's almost always important to dry the patient. And when you dry the patient, you should remember it's not only affecting the lung, because this will get drier and the superimposed pressure will decrease and the lung will be much better, but it's also taking away edema in the belly. So it decreases fluid everywhere, because the drugs are not so selective that you can expect them just to work in the lung. So they are good both for the belly and for the lung. You decrease the fluid level, and that improves lung performance and decrease the abdominal weight influence on the patient's lungs. So if we have a normal, healthy extrapulmonary patient and we get pneumonia, these dorsal alveoli will collapse, and we will have a small baby lung at top, and whatever you do with that, you cannot get rid of it, and you are just increasing the pressure, and compliance is actually going down because you are getting up to a level of inflation where the elasticity of the lung is at its top. It cannot go further. So if you go further, you risk a pneumothorax. And this shows also that in this type of non-responders, the end expiratory lung volume increase is almost zero in the lower part of the lung. Now, you cannot inflate the lower part because it's fluid, and you cannot make it having gas. You cannot turn it into champagne or whatever. You will have fluid down there, but you can inflate the upper part. Luckily, most of our patients are extrapulmonary, which means that the majority will fare well from PEEP, but a small part, about a third, will be very badly treated by PEEP. And here you can see, this is the extrapulmonary. This shows how high the transpulmonary pressure is at 15 in PEEP, 21. And in this pulmonary, it's 33. 33 is more than 10 centimeters higher than the upper limit you should ever reach with transpulmonary pressure. So it's a really dangerous situation. And in all these studies where they compare high and low PEEP, they take all the patients and then they have a lottery. You are on high, you are on low. And then, of course, about 2/3 of the patients fare well from high PEEP. They get a small decrease in mortality in the group with high PEEP, but it's not significant because it's all those who didn't fare well from high PEEP that were in the high PEEP group, they took down the results, so they were on average not statistically significant. So they should have separated these patients before. They should treat those who fare well with high PEEP, not those who does not. So I have it's like a comic strip. This is, up there you have a healthy extrapulmonary lung. You can see did I have a pointer? No. Yes. Or no. No. Up there you can see healthy lung with alveoli, biggest at top, lower at the bottom, but everything is open. Here you can see in the blue it says 0 to 4 is the superimpose the pressure in the tissue in the lung. 4 at the bottom of the lung, 0 at top. The abdominal pressure in the green arrow is 0 at the top and 20, perhaps even, 20. So the difference in pressure is 16 at the bottom of the lung. If we go to extrapulmonary ARDS, then there's an increase in the abdominal pressure, the gravitational abdominal pressure, but not very much in the lung. So now we have an increase in the gradient over the diaphragm. This can be counteracted by PEEP. And when we add PEEP, of course, we move up, make the lung, the diameter higher, and this can be inflated. And when we add a tidal volume, even more is inflated, rather evenly. This is the situation you get with APRV, because what you do is by having this very short expiratory time, there is not time for the diaphragm to push back during expirations. So this part will be open. There will be a very high lung volume. In the pulmonary, you have the fluid at the bottom and a small lung, and of course when you inflate this by PEEP, you inflate the upper part more. You do nothing to the fluid. And if you put a tidal volume, you further increase. And you can also see the difference in the diaphragmatic position here and here. The outside of the lung is almost normal because gas has been exchanged for fluid. So the outside is normal, and the pressure in the lung is up to 15, 16 centimeters. And that means that this is equal to having a PEEP of 15, 16 centimeters from the beginning. So adding further PEEP will not move the exterior anymore. So that's why PEEP is not useful in these patients, but it is in the extrapulmonary. I'm not going to show this, but this is an interesting, this is 3 recruitment maneuvers, 40 centimeters in pigs. We have done it in patients also. It's a hefty procedure, but so we did it only twice. Quite a few of patients where you did a recruitment maneuver by an inflation for 20 seconds to 40 centimeters. The cardiac output went down to half. In some patients, cardiac output went from 5 liters to 1 liter in 20 seconds. And of course, we were cowards, so we released the pressure. And it's totally unnecessary because you can do the same by keeping on for 20 minutes with a PEEP instead. But what is interesting is that afterwards, you have this fall, it goes down until it reaches, because the belly is slowly coming back after you have pushed it away with these high pressures. And you can see here, we started with 0, this recruitment maneuver, then 10, and you can see that the regional distribution of ventilation, once again, distribution, it's the dorsal parts because the increase in PEEP by 10 filled up the upper parts, so the tidal volume went down. So you have an increase of compliance in the lower parts of the lung. And you can also see that when we went to 10, there is almost no decrease in lung volume in the upper lung. But down here, there is a tendency, very fast tendency for the lung to return to its former volume. The time constants, fine word, the time to collapse is much faster in the lower parts of the lung because of the high pressure from the abdomen and the weight, and that the abdominal pressure is mainly affecting the lower part of the lung. And that means that when you do APRV and have a very short expiratory time, this means that you don't let it go down for a long time. So you prevent the fall in the lower part. You keep the lung volume up much better. Now, it's all about keeping the lung volume up, but open suctioning. In lavage pigs, you can see here the effect of this is the end expiratory lung volume, this is the tidal volumes. Here we disconnect and we suction. You can see that the disconnect is a very marked decrease in lung volume, and the suctioning is very little more. You would think that the suctioning would further empty quite a lot, but it doesn't, because the rib cage will not be turned down that easy. The rib cage is a very forceful structure. I did a totally unethical experiment with my daughter and my son-in-law. He is a fit guy, so he was lying on the floor, and she said that he was only 60 kilos. I think that was a little bit untrue, and I asked her to stand on his chest. And you say, just to understand how forceful, it was no problem. He was lying on the floor, smoking a cigar, showing that he could still breathe, and both making inspirations and expirations. But I didn't do a film of this, which is a pity, because it was a great experiment. But it shows that, of course, if you suction, you cannot empty the lung totally, because it's stuck to the interior of the thoracic wall, and the rib cage is very, very forceful. So it goes down, but then this is in volume control ventilation. You see, as soon as we start to, we connect again, the volume goes up very fast. But look here, this is pressure control, exactly the same procedure, and it goes down. And now it takes quite a time for the volume to come back. And that is because when you do the suctioning, you primarily empty the lower part of the lung, because that's easiest, because there is so much pressure from everywhere, so it's easy to collapse the lower part of the lung. That means that compliance goes down, and in pressure control, the ventilator adapts its delivery of gas to the compliance of the lung. So it does not force, instead of forcing gas into the patient, it stops forcing when the pressure is reached. So it takes quite a long time. This can be counteracted by just increasing the pressure support, or for a short while do volume control. And here you can see the decrease in volume in the ventral, mid-dorsal, and dorsal region. And you can see in the dorsal region, you almost totally collapse the lung. So you have a very low compliance in the dorsal lung. And of course, that's where the circulation is best. So you lose a lot of the gas exchange immediately. And regional compliance, you can see in volume control, it goes from this in the dorsal part down to this. It's just a third afterwards. But the upper part of the lung is fairly unchanged compliance. And it goes back fast. And here is the pressure control, down and slowly moving upwards. And then you would think that this is only something in pigs with open suctioning. So here we have bronchoscopy in patient with closed suctioning, volume control and pressure control. You can see it's almost identical curves. Here we had FRC from the beginning at 1.5 liter. Disconnection, suctioning, it was closed. Suctioning, taking down the bronchoscope, then suctioning, down to 900 milliliters. So we lost 600 milliliters of the lung volume by suctioning. And then stopping the suctioning, removing the bronchoscope, everything went down fairly fast. No real problem. But look at this pressure control. From here it was almost the same volume, down to 200 milliliters. It was down more than 1 liter when we suction. And this is because when you have the bronchoscope in, it takes quite a lot of space in the lumen. So the pressure control ventilation will be very low in that part of the lung. It will be almost zero. And when you start the suctioning, the ventilator cannot support and give gas down there. So you empty it fairly well, and when we stopped suctioning and took this bronchoscope out, it went up. But after 5 minutes, this patient was still blue. It's a time-consuming to get up to the same level again. So we had to go over to volume control and increase PEEP to regain the volume. So pressure control, which is favored by many, has some disadvantages in connection with suctioning. You should go over to volume control afterwards and to regain the lung volume. Here you can see a case where the right lung is empty, or almost empty, and and you can see that it's 4 different quadrants, and it's the 5 and 11% of the tidal volume goes to the upper and lower right lung, and the rest goes to the left lung. And then after a fairly hefty recruitment maneuver and a high PEEP, everything was back to normal. But this was something, I think this was a case where there was some kind of mucus in the main bronchus to the right lung. I will end up to tell you a good story about, if I have time, do I? 5 minutes, very good. This is about a young boy, age 23, who didn't wake up when his mother was telling him to do that. It's not very uncommon, but he was very persistent in not answering. So she thought he was ill, and some hours later he was very ill, and they took him to local hospital, and he had meningococcal sepsis, and during the night he was getting more and more difficult to oxygenate, and they gave him the PEEP of 18, and he was still on 82% oxygenation level. And in the morning he came over to our hospital, we telephoned to Stockholm to get the ECMO team down, and then when that was done, we connected the EIT, and we could see that 97% of the ventilation was at top. He had a baby lung, and the baby lung is always upstairs. Now the question was, did he have extrapulmonary or pulmonary disease? If it's pulmonary and we would increase PEEP further, we would have overinflated the top of the lung. But that is the good thing with PEEP, with EIT, because in this situation we could increase PEEP centimeter by centimeter and see whether the effect was that PEEP was inflating further down and the tidal volume moved down. So I stood there fiddling with the ventilator, came from 18, 19, 20, 21, and there was not very much improvement, but we could see, at least during the inspiration, that gas moved down here, but during expirations it was still very little. But finally, at 27 centimeters of PEEP, the oxygenation was 94%, 70% of the ventilation up, and now it was 30% down here. And this is the kind of thing you can see and do with EIT, is that you can see if there is a redistribution, then you know that it's fairly safe to increase the pressure, because that means that gas is redistributed downstairs and it's a big influence of the belly on the size of the lung. But if we had not had an EIT, I would not have done this. And when I had done this, the Stockholm team came to Sahlgrenska and said that they didn't need to do ECMO on him, and then instead they watched a football match on television and charged us 100,000 crowns and went home. But the guy was out of the ventilator 1 week afterwards, and he has no mental he's nothing bad with his head. Thank you very much.